On the 7th of March 2026, the world woke up to a terrifying, suffocating stillness. The Strait of Hormuz, the great iron artery of global energy, fell into a total, uncompromising blockade following the violent escalation of conflict in Iran. Global markets did not just react, they plunged into a state of absolute, unmitigated panic. Oil prices skyrocketed past all historical records, and gold hit an unprecedented peak on the international stage. This sudden paralysis of the Middle East has sent a violent shockwave through the dining tables of every working family, aggressively threatening the very survival of the Western economy. Imagine walking out to your driveway on a crisp morning only to realize that the comfortable, predictable world you knew just 24 hours ago has completely evaporated. The frantic news broadcasts blur into a single chilling realization: the engines have died. For over a century, the entire towering structure of Western prosperity was meticulously built on a single fragile assumption that the black gold buried beneath the sands of distant lands would flow forever, cheap and uninterrupted. But that promise was always a house of cards. And now, the wind has finally started to blow. Stay with us. This is more than a headline. It is a hinge in history. If this story resonates, show your support with a like, a comment, or a subscription. It means more than numbers. It keeps the story alive. As the vital waterways remain locked under a heavy veil of naval blockades and escalating fire, the steady pulse of the West is beginning to violently falter. You see it first at the local petrol station. The digital numbers on the sign change so rapidly they seem to vibrate, climbing to $5, $7, and then $12 a gallon. This is not just a sterile statistic flashing on a screen at the stock exchange. This is a direct, devastating hit to the wallet of every single person who worked 40 exhausting years to earn a peaceful retirement. This nightmare perfectly mirrors the devastating 1973 oil embargo. Back then, fuel lines stretched for miles, and rampant inflation ruthlessly stripped the hard-earned dignity from the savings of the working middle class. The West realized far too late that its magnificent empire was precariously built on a foundation of shifting sand. Today, history is repeating itself with a terrifying vengeance. The working man, the one with calloused hands who physically built the towering skyscrapers and paved the endless roads of the nation, is always the very first to feel the bitter sting of systemic collapse. While the financial elite move their digital numbers around in comfortably air-conditioned offices, families are looking at their grocery bills with genuine terror in their eyes. The simple, daily necessity of driving to a medical clinic or heating a home in the bitter winter is suddenly multiplying overnight. Inflation is no longer a distant ghost confined to the history books. It is a massive tidal wave crashing violently into your living room. The dollar, once the undisputed supreme king of the global economy, is suddenly shivering in the cold, unforgiving light of a new reality. We were proudly told that energy independence was just around the corner. We were repeatedly assured that our future was entirely secure. Yet here we are, helplessly watching the global energy map aggressively bleed red. The deep-seated arrogance of the old world is being brutally stripped away, layer by layer. The elite strategists in Western capitals are in a state of blind panic, scurrying through the heavily guarded corridors of power like rats on a sinking ship. They realize much too late that you cannot eat gold, and you absolutely cannot run a modern superpower on empty political rhetoric. The reality of geopolitics is brutally simple. When the Middle East catches fire, the West freezes. The psychological weight of this sudden collapse is perhaps even heavier than the devastating economic one. There is a profound, creeping sense of an ending era, a terrible feeling that the long, comfortable summer of Western dominance is finally transitioning into a harsh and unforgiving winter. The massive factories that once hummed with the steady sound of industrial progress are falling completely silent as the cost of basic electricity becomes an unbearable, crushing burden. Supply chains that span the entire globe are snapping violently like brittle glass. We are witnessing the dying pulse of a system that arrogantly forgot its roots and deliberately ignored its fatal vulnerabilities. But in this terrifying darkness, the desperate, searching eyes of the old empires are already scanning the horizon for a new victim. They are aggressively looking for a new, vulnerable frontier to exploit, a new, massive source of wealth to keep their dying machines running for just a little longer. They have executed this exact playbook for centuries. Whenever the West found itself backed into a dangerous corner, it instinctively looked toward the equator. They look toward the vast, sun-drenched landscapes of the global south that have historically served as the world's endless, unpaid harvest. Today, they see the staggering, untapped deposits of strategic minerals that the modern technological world desperately needs to survive. They arrogantly assume that the old rules of the geopolitical game remain entirely unchanged. They assume that they can simply fly in on private jets, sign a few pieces of paper with compliant, fearful leaders, and seamlessly ship the sovereign wealth away, leaving nothing but toxic dust and broken promises behind. They are looking at the African continent not as a genuine partnership, but as a desperate life support machine for their own failing economic system. However, the world of 2026 is fundamentally and dangerously different from the world of 1973. The old colonial maps are being systematically burned. The sheer desperation of the West is suddenly meeting a new, impenetrable kind of resistance. As the lights flicker and die in the great capitals of the old empires, a brilliant, undeniable light is being lit in the heart of the Sahel. The architects of the old world are about to discover that a fierce, unprecedented demand for absolute sovereignty has taken root. When they desperately knock on the door of Burkina Faso, expecting the usual subservience, they will be met by the unyielding gaze of Ibrahim Traore. The doors they used to casually kick open are now forged of solid iron, and the proud people standing behind them are no longer afraid. The pulse of the West may be rapidly dying, but the heartbeat of a newly awakened continent is just beginning to find its powerful rhythm. As the private jets of the Western conglomerates begin their descent onto African capitals, they expect a quick surrender to save their freezing empires. But what terrifying reality awaits them when they finally step out into the heat of the Sahel? As the thick black smoke rises from the blocked ports of the Persian Gulf and the silent warships nervously patrol the volatile waters of the Middle East, the grand architects of global power are forcefully compelled to look elsewhere. Their desperate eyes, once entirely fixed on the shifting sands of the Arabian Peninsula, are now swinging violently south. They are frantically scanning the globe for a new savior, a new massive vein of wealth that can miraculously jumpstart their stalled industries and pacify their restless, angry populations. In the high-security briefing rooms of Washington and the ornate, echoing palaces of Europe, the compass needles are suddenly pointing directly toward the equator. They are looking intently at the vast, sun-drenched heart of the African continent. This is what we must call the equatorial eye. A hungry, desperate, and calculating gaze that has historically brought both immense global attention and immeasurable, devastating suffering to the proud people of the soil. For centuries, the Western world arrogantly treated Africa as a limitless, unguarded warehouse. It was a magnificent place where the seeds of staggering wealth were generously sown by nature, only to be ruthlessly reaped by foreign hands who never broke a single drop of sweat in the punishing African sun. From the ivory and rubber of the distant past to the oil and diamonds of the recent century, the tragic, repetitive story was always identical. The imperial maps were casually drawn in Berlin and London. The predatory, one-sided contracts were aggressively written in Paris, and the unimaginable profit was safely and permanently banked in New York. The people of the continent, those who physically lived above the gold and walked daily over the uranium, were callously treated as mere geographical obstacles or cheap, disposable labor in the great, never-ending harvest of others. But as the world stands trembling on the terrifying brink of an unprecedented energy abyss, the desperate West is finally realizing that their very survival now depends entirely on strategic minerals they can no longer simply take by brute force or diplomatic trickery. To understand exactly why the Sahel region and Burkina Faso have suddenly become the center of the world's strategic map, we must closely examine the rapidly changing nature of global power itself. The 20th century was definitively shaped by oil, the black liquid that comfortably fueled the rapid rise of the American dream. But the 21st century is being violently written in the earth. It is defined by strategic minerals. The modern empire desperately requires the lithium for their advanced electric vehicles, the vital cobalt for their complex technological supply chains, and the high-grade uranium absolutely essential to power their glowing nuclear reactors. Africa holds the vast, overwhelming majority of these profound treasures. The stark reality is this: without the deep red soil of the Sahel, the highly advertised transition to green energy in the West immediately becomes a childish, impossible fairy tale. Without African minerals, the very satellites that silently guide our modern world will permanently fall from the sky. Let us take a moment here, not to rush forward, but to give thanks. Write a comment with a simple thank you to Traore, to Burkina Faso, or to the spirit of sovereignty itself. Gratitude is not a formality, it is recognition, it is dignity expressed in words. When you add your voice of thanks, you are not just engaging with a video, you are standing in solidarity with a story of freedom and pride. So, before we continue, take this pause to comment your thank you. Together, those words become a beacon that shines far beyond the screen. Deep in the sun-scorched earth of northern Burkina Faso, far from the glittering stock exchanges of the West, there is a hard-working man named Madu. He is 55 years old, but the deep, exhausted lines painstakingly etched into his weathered face make him look like he has lived for an entire century. For over 30 exhausting years, Madu has woken up long before the dawn to silently descend into the narrow, suffocating shafts of the gold mines. His hands are thick with deep, heavy calluses, and his lungs are permanently filled with the fine red dust of the Sahel. He is just one of the forgotten millions who have spent their entire lives tirelessly digging for the magnificent treasures that smoothly power the world's luxury markets and securely stabilize foreign central banks. Yet, as Madu walks slowly back to his small, tin-roofed home in the fading evening light, the brutal, unvarnished reality of his existence is undeniable. He walks past bright children who cannot go to school because there are absolutely no books. He watches respected elders suffer in quiet agony because there is no basic medicine in the local clinics. For decades, he stood quietly in the choking dust and watched the massive, reinforced transport trucks carry the raw gold ore away toward the distant coast, toward the massive cargo ships, toward the wealthy, illuminated capitals of Europe and America. He literally saw the sovereign wealth of his ancestors being completely hollowed out beneath his very feet, leaving absolutely nothing behind but deeply scarred earth and profoundly broken spirits. This is the quiet, devastating tragedy that has relentlessly played out across the continent for generations. It is the heartbreaking story of a devoted father who works himself entirely to the bone, only to realize with absolute crushing clarity that the rules of the international order were deliberately and meticulously written to ensure his beloved children remain trapped in the exact same cycle of manufactured poverty. In the wealthy financial districts of the West, sharp analysts frequently talk about gold as a lucrative investment portfolio or a strategic hedge against sudden inflation. But for hard-working men like Madu, this immense wealth was a suffocating curse. It was a precious resource that supposedly belonged to them in name only, serving only to enrich the equatorial eye that constantly watched them from above. This deep historical injustice created a simmering, powerful anger within the hearts of the people. It was not a blind, destructive rage, but a righteous, unyielding demand for basic human dignity. It was a silent, powerful cry for a new generation of leadership, a leader who would finally look at the calloused hands of the people and see them as a formidable source of sovereign strength rather than a cheap, disposable tool for foreign exploitation. The global conglomerates are frantically packing their briefcases right now, flying into the Sahel with their old predatory contracts, arrogantly expecting the same subservient smiles and rapid signatures. They assume that because the Middle East has closed its iron gates, Africa will simply open its veins to save the freezing West once again. But they have forgotten one crucial, terrifying rule of nature. A bountiful harvest requires significantly more than just soil and seed. It absolutely requires the consent of the one who tends the land. What happens when the desperate, hungry executives step out onto the tarmac and realize that the era of blind submission has violently ended? In the year 2022, amidst the swirling chaos and the crumbling hollow promises of the old guard, a new and formidable voice finally emerged from the ranks of the military. His name is Captain Ibrahim Traore. When he first appeared on the world stage, the international media machines immediately tried to paint him with the same tired, dismissive brush they use for every African leader who dares to defy their scripted narratives. They called him a radical, a temporary disruption, a young officer who simply did not understand the complex, invisible web of international diplomacy. But the architects of the old world were catastrophically wrong. Traore did not emerge from the ivory towers of academia or the detached elite social circles of the capital city. He came from the same sun-drenched dust and the same punishing heat as Madu. He understood with absolute clarity that a nation can never be truly free if its stomach is chronically empty and its pockets are being systematically picked by foreign conglomerates. Before we reveal the next chapter, which is perhaps the most powerful assertion of sovereignty you will ever hear, I want to pause and speak directly to you. If this channel has moved you, if these stories are touching something deep in your spirit, then consider becoming a member. Not for exclusive content or perks, but because supporting this channel is directly supporting narratives that mainstream media refuses to tell. Every membership is a vote for Sankara's Echo's mission. Every member becomes a co-creator of the revolution we are documenting. Join us. Stand with the principle that African wealth belongs to Africa. Ibrahim Traore represents a seismic, irreversible shift in the African consciousness. He represents a generation that has completely stopped asking for permission to exist and has instead started demanding its rightful historical place at the table of history. Under his leadership, the Sahel is no longer a silent, passive victim waiting for the crumbs of the global order. He spoke words that had not been heard in the halls of power for decades, echoing the fierce, unyielding spirit of the great Thomas Sankara. He told the world that Burkina Faso would no longer be a place where the seed is planted by African sweat, only to be reaped by foreign greed. This is the very essence of resource nationalism. The simple but revolutionary idea that the staggering wealth of the land must first and primarily serve the people who actually live upon it. For a person who remembers the long, exhausting struggle for civil rights, this narrative is intimately and powerfully familiar. It is the exact same battle for the fundamental human right to own one's own labor and one's own destiny. It is the relentless fight for the basic dignity of being the undisputed master of your own house. The rise of Ibrahim Traore is not merely a political event, it is a profound educational moment for the entire world. It teaches us that the old colonial structures, which merely changed their names but carefully kept their predatory functions, are finally crumbling into the dust. The West is now facing a leader who speaks the language of sovereignty with a clarity that is utterly terrifying to those who rely on a permanent state of African subservience. Traore has moved far beyond the empty theatrical rhetoric of the past. He has begun the hard systematic work of decoupling his nation from the predatory financial systems that have kept the African soul in a state of artificial, manufactured underdevelopment. He is showing the world that when a people finally remember their own inherent strength, the giants of the global order suddenly look much, much smaller. As the energy crisis of 2026 looms darkly over the horizon, the voice from the Sahel is growing louder and more resonant. It is a voice that tells the global powers that the price of doing business has fundamentally changed. You can no longer buy a nation's entire future for a handful of copper coins and a patronizing pat on the back. The locks on the gates have been changed by a generation that knows the true, unvarnished value of what lies beneath their feet. When the West knocks on Africa's door in its hour of desperate, shivering need, they will not find the tired, defeated eyes of the past. They will find the steady, unyielding gaze of Captain Ibrahim Traore and the people who have finally decided that their harvest belongs exclusively to them. But changing the laws is only the first step. To protect the wealth from the scavengers, one must build a fortress that no amount of foreign pressure can breach. As the Western diplomats prepare their lists of sanctions and their threats of isolation, Burkina Faso is already building something they never thought possible: a golden fortress designed to lock the treasury from the inside. While the diplomats in the West are busy debating the complex nuances of international law and drawing fragile red lines in the shifting sands of the Middle East, a very different kind of architecture is being meticulously built in the heart of Ouagadougou. It is not a fortress made of heavy stone and mortar, though it is proving to be just as impenetrable. It is a fortress built on the uncompromising principle of economic self-reliance, a golden fortress. For decades, the global powers treated the mining codes of Africa as a mere suggestion, a set of flexible rules that could be easily bypassed with a few well-placed bribes or the subtle, suffocating pressure of a foreign embassy. But Ibrahim Traore has taken those old, dusty pieces of paper and torn them to shreds in front of the entire world. He realized that the first, most vital step to true freedom is not the mere waving of a national flag, but the absolute, undisputed control over the minerals that sleep beneath the ancestral soil. Let us look closely at this masterclass in sovereignty that is currently unfolding before our eyes. In the old world, the mining giants from Australia, Canada, and Europe operated with a level of arrogance that is hard for the average person to even imagine. They would arrive with their massive machinery, carve deep, bleeding wounds into the African earth, and extract billions of dollars worth of gold while paying a mere pittance in royalties to the state. The exact percentage of wealth lost to these unfair contracts remains missing from the official balance sheets, but the result was a legalized form of plunder. Traore's government in Burkina Faso has fundamentally altered this geopolitical calculus. They boldly revised the mining code, securing a significantly larger mandatory share of revenues for the people. They did not politely ask for a seat at the table. They redesigned the table itself. They issued a chilling ultimatum to the multinational giants: align your operations with the national interest or prepare to leave the country immediately. But the most revolutionary move in this grand strategy is something that the mainstream media rarely discusses in detail. For centuries, the raw earth of Africa was shipped across the vast oceans to European capitals to be purified, weighed, and stamped with foreign insignias. Imagine the sheer absurdity of it. A nation produces the gold, but it must send it to the very people who once colonized it just to prove its own value. This was the ultimate psychological chain of the old world order, a monopoly on the truth of value. In response, Burkina Faso has initiated the construction of its very first national gold refinery. From now on, the gold born in the Sahel will be refined on the soil of the Sahel. It will be stamped with the mark of the people whose calloused hands dug it from the earth. This is more than an industrial project. It is an act of historical defiance, a physical manifestation of a philosophy that refuses to bow. Now, let us turn this story into a shared moment. Take a second, right here, to tell us where you are watching from. Type the name of your city, your land, the soil beneath your feet. And as you do, know this: Sankara's echo sends you not just thanks, but a blessing. For strength in your hands, for pride in your heart, for light on the road ahead. The comments below become a map of connection, showing that this message reaches far beyond borders. This monumental shift is sending shockwaves through the diaspora. To those who have seen the struggles of the 1960s and the long, exhausting fight for equality, this moment should feel like a victory, centuries in the making. You know exactly what it feels like to have your labor exploited and your worth diminished by a system that was never designed for your success. What Ibrahim Traore is doing in the Sahel is the global extension of that very same fight. He is building a fortress where the wealth of the ancestors is finally being harnessed to build a road for the children of the future. You carry a library of history in your memories. You remember the 1960s not as a chapter in a textbook, but as the very air you breathed. You remember the sound of marching feet and the unbreakable resolve in the eyes of those who decided that enough was finally enough. You lived through the era of fire hoses and police dogs, of lunch counter sit-ins and the long struggle just to cast a ballot. You fought for the right to walk in the light of equality, but while you were marching in the streets of Birmingham or Washington, your brothers and sisters across the Atlantic were fighting a parallel battle on the red soil of Africa. The 1960s brought a wave of independence that swept across the continent, but a painful truth eventually settled in. Political independence without economic control is nothing more than a quieter, more sophisticated form of bondage. Today, in 2026, what you're witnessing in the Sahel is the second liberation. The front line has simply moved from the segregated buses of the American South to the gold mines of Burkina Faso. When Ibrahim Traore stands at a podium and demands that African wealth must serve African people, he is speaking with the same voice as the giants of the civil rights movement. He is asserting a dignity that cannot be negotiated and a sovereignty that cannot be bought. This is the sentiment growing among our diaspora, a realization that the old rules were never meant to protect us. Consider the case of intellectuals like Dr. Osi, a professor of political science in London who spent 30 years teaching the rules-based order. He recently admitted he can no longer teach those theories with a straight face, observing that Traore is decolonizing the map in real time without asking for permission. The West may try to frame this as a threat to global security, but we must ask, whose security are they really talking about? Are they talking about the security of working families or the security of profits for the few who have grown fat on the blood of others? The year 2026 will not just be remembered for the closing of a strait in the Middle East. It will be remembered as the year that Africa finally locked its own gates and became the master of its own treasury. But as the golden fortress rises, the old world prepares its final, most desperate strike. As the calendar turns deeper into 2026, the world is no longer debating if a massive shift is happening. It is living through the reckoning. The paralysis of the Strait of Hormuz has stripped away the last layers of Western economic arrogance. We are witnessing a monumental transfer of leverage in real time. For over a century, power was measured in barrels of oil and the ability to project military force in the Middle Eastern deserts. But in this new fractured world order, power is being fundamentally redefined. It is dug from the red earth of the Sahel in the form of strategic minerals, rare earth elements, and the ultimate financial shield, gold. In this rapidly shifting paradigm, the African continent is no longer the perpetual victim or the quiet beggar sitting on a throne of unimaginable wealth. It has become the undeniable kingmaker of the 21st century. The mathematics for the Western superpowers is both simple and terrifying. Without the high-grade uranium from the Sahel, the nuclear plants of Europe grow cold. Without the strategic minerals of the continent, the next generation of Western technology and defense systems cannot be built. And without the gold that is now being refined and guarded on African soil, the global financial markets have no anchor to prevent a total freefall into hyperinflation. The West is facing an existential choice that it has avoided for 500 years. Will it continue to treat Africa as a mine to be plundered, or will it finally learn to negotiate with a partner that demands absolute respect? The old tools of coercion, the economic sanctions, the diplomatic isolation, and the media smears are rapidly losing their edge. When you are starving for the very air you need to breathe, you cannot afford to insult the one who holds the oxygen tank. This is the ultimate realization of African resource power. We have looked at the architects of the old world and signaled that the era of the subservient partner is dead. The global map has been permanently altered, drawn anew by the hands of those who refuse to be conquered ever again. The year 2026 brings a terrifying dawn for the old empires, but for the people of the soil, it is the first light of a long-awaited day. The fuse has been lit, The old world is burning, and the final countdown to a sovereign Africa has begun. The future is no longer a gift to be granted by the powerful. It is a harvest to be claimed by those who tend the soil. We have seen how the desperation of the West is meeting the iron resolve of the Sahel. We have witnessed the vision of turning a nation of miners into a nation of masters, building a golden fortress that can no longer be breached by empty promises or predatory contracts. This is the moment where justice finally meets reality. But this story is not just about gold or oil. It is about the spark of dignity that lives within every one of us. If your heart beats for the freedom of Africa, if you believe that every man and woman deserves to reap what they sow, then you are part of this rising tide. Do not let this message end here. Let it be a seed planted in the soil of your spirit. If you stand with the principle that African wealth belongs to Africa, then I invite you to join our global family in a simple act of solidarity. We must acknowledge that the road to genuine independence is long and filled with shadows, but the light coming from the Sahel is getting brighter every day. We are no longer the victims of history, we are the authors of the next chapter. The struggle for dignity that began on those dusty roads of the 1960s is finding its fulfillment in the high-stakes geopolitics of today. When we say Africa rising, we are not just talking about a continent. We are talking about a people who have finally remembered their own strength. We are talking about a bloodline that cannot be broken and a future that belongs to us. As we prepare to end, remember, this is not the end of the road, but a seed planted in the soil of your heart. Every story of dignity, every voice of sovereignty is part of a harvest that lies ahead. If you want to see that harvest grow, subscribe. Let this channel be the road we walk together, the light we carry forward. Your subscription is not for us alone, it is for the promise of what is still to come. Join us and be ready for the chapter that comes after this one. The keys to the future are no longer in Washington, London, or Paris. They are being held firmly in the callous, steady hands of a new generation inspired by Ibrahim Traore. As the sun sets on the old world and the engines of the 20th century grind to a halt in the cold waters of Hormuz, we are left with a single, undeniable truth. The magnificent era of sovereignty has begun in Burkina Faso, proving that a lion who guards his own den can never be enslaved. The road ahead is guided by the light of genuine independence, a light that shines brighter because Ibrahim Traore has decided that the harvest of the earth will finally stay where it was planted.